The Clemson Tigers, who, of course, are currently tied for last place in the ACC with Boston College. Just absolute poverty. Poverty not seen in or around Death Valley in quite some time. But yes, the Clemson Tigers are currently tied for last place in the ACC with Boston College. Clemson currently sits at 0-2. 0-2 in the ACC. But never fear, Tater Man. You're getting out of the ACC. That's right. Twitter said so. October 10th. Yep. You can't beat Duke. So you're running for the hills. You're getting out of the ACC. Twitter said so. So we'll all find out on October 10th that Clemson's leaving the ACC. Shout out to Twitter sources. Yeah. Anyway, that's great news for Clemson. Yeah, I mean, last place in the ACC. Yeah, you better get out of there quick. Clemson is playing on the road this week at Syracuse. Syracuse, unlike Clemson, is undefeated at 4-0. And unlike Clemson, they actually have a win over a Power 5 team this year. Clemson's currently 2-2, 0 wins against the Power 5. Clemson's 1-4 in their last 5 games against the Power 5. Absolute poverty. They've lost 2 straight ACC games. They've lost 2 straight SEC games. What are you doing? Jumping out of the, what do they call it? Jumping out of the frying pan and into the fire? Oh, we got to get out of the ACC. We can't beat Duke or Florida State. We've lost two ACC games in a row. Where are we going to go? Let's go to the SEC. Hey, dummy, hadn't we lost 2 games in a row to the SEC too? I don't want to talk about that. Yeah, plus we lost to South Carolina and Tennessee. Those are the 2 teams we lost to. What are we doing? I don't know what you're doing. But you play on the road at Syracuse. Syracuse undefeated, 4-0. This is the second year in a row Syracuse has kind of got off to a, I don't even know if hot start is the right word. And I know what people are already saying about Syracuse. Yeah, they're 4-0, but we've seen this before. And look who they've beat. Look who they've played. I get it. But look who's Clemson's beat. Clemson's beat Charleston Southern and what, FAU or FIU? One of the FU schools. I don't know which one, either FAU or FIU. At least Syracuse has a win against the Power 5. It's against Purdue, though. And Purdue's not any good. And they beat Army and a couple other nobodies. I have to admit, this does kind of seem like a rerun of last year when it comes to Syracuse. They're a 6.5-point underdog at home in this one to Clemson. And, man, it would be fun and funny if Syracuse were to hand Clemson their 3rd straight ACC loss. And I do think it's a possibility. Things are not good in Tatertown, right? Sometimes when you see this happen to teams, they kind of throw in the towel and just look at every single goal. You sort of have like series of goals within a season. And I know everybody's going to say, our goal is to win the national title. Yeah, I mean, I guess I get that to an extent. But along the way to potentially reach that goal, you have, there's sort of smaller milestones you sort of want to check off along the way. One of them is like, can we beat a Power 5 team? Clemson, that's no. But I mean, forget winning the ACC championship. The odds of Clemson even making the ACC title game at this point are so small because they've got 2 conference losses. And both of those teams are undefeated in the ACC, Clemson, and Florida State, and Duke. So Florida State and Duke would have to lose 3 conference games each in order for Clemson to move ahead of them. And that's assuming Clemson doesn't lose another conference game, which we all know that they are. It's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when. So sometimes when teams that in the preseason have lofty expectations and then here we are 4 weeks into the season, and pretty much every goal Clemson set forward for this year is already unattainable, and we haven't even turned the calendar of October. Sometimes you will see teams kind of throw in the towel in that situation. I don't think that's going to happen with Clemson. Now, I've got my issues with Dabo. I think he's made a series of philosophical mistakes over the last few years that have kind of led Clemson to where it is now, and some other issues I've had with him along the way. But one positive about his emphasis on culture and only having, players who are all in, and just that whole mantra that he has, it's got some drawbacks. It's got some downsides, and we're seeing some of those drawbacks and downsides on the field last year and this year. But it's got some upside too, and I think, cohesion, team unity, the fact that the players, even though they're 2-2, are most likely bought into what's going on there. I think the odds of Clemson just sort of throwing in the towel, hanging it up, cashing it in, just showing up and going through the motions, however you want to put it, I do think the odds of that happening are pretty small. Now, does that mean Clemson can't lose this game on the road at Syracuse? No, of course they could. If some of the same issues that have been hounding Clemson all year pop up in this game, then that's kind of what it would take, I think, for Syracuse to have a chance here. Now, what are some of those issues? Well, there's been some serious and questionable play calling and personnel decisions, sitting Maffa in the game last week because he missed a block. Some red zone issues in terms of play calling and even personnel down there too. But the turnover thing has been the biggest issue for Clemson this year, in my opinion. They've got a bunch of them, but I think that's been the biggest one. They have had at least one turnover in every single game they've played. And in the Duke and the Florida State game, the two games they lost, you can directly point to those turnovers as two of the biggest reasons they lost those games. I mean, multiple turnovers in the red zone against Duke. Florida State had a scoop and score on a sack on Cade Klubnik in the game this past weekend, and even in the two games they won against Charleston Southern and the FU school, in those two games they had a total of 3 turnovers. So they've had a problem protecting the ball. And if that problem shows up again here on the road at Syracuse, then Syracuse is going to have a chance to pull off this upset. Another thing that could potentially work in Syracuse's favor in this game, I think, is their quarterback, Garrett Schrader. Number one, he's got a ton of experience, way more than Cade Klubnik has, the quarterback for Clemson. And he's a legitimate dual-threat quarterback. He can run around and hurt teams with his legs. We've seen him do it last year. We've seen him do it this year. And if you go back to the Duke game, now Duke is a better team than Syracuse. So this comparison only goes so far, but Riley Leonard and Garrett Schrader, to me, are similar quarterbacks in that way. I think Riley Leonard is better than Garrett Schrader, and I think Duke is better than Syracuse. So don't misunderstand what I'm saying. But Garrett Schrader is that same style of quarterback. And how many times did we see Riley Leonard extend drives for Duke back in that week 1 game, picking up yards with his legs, or even scrambling out of the pocket before he would throw the ball downfield to pick up first downs and things like that. So those are the things I think Syracuse can do, will try to do, and will have to do. They're probably going to have to create some turnovers, and their quarterback's going to have a really good game with his legs and his arms. He's their leading rusher, which I never think that's great. I always want a mobile quarterback who can pick me up a first down on 3rd and 6 with his legs if he needs to. I always want that. I can't imagine ever being in a situation where I was happy or wanted my quarterback to be, or was happy about my quarterback being the leading rusher on the team. And that's the situation Syracuse finds themselves in with Garrett Schrader. And in this game, I think he might have to do some of that. But and then you look at Clemson, of course, their defense let them down a little bit in the Duke game in some key moments. But other than that, really, overall, the Clemson defense has just about played like I think I expected it to play. I think they're a top 10, top 15-ish type of defense. And don't even bother pointing out or telling me what they're ranked in some random category down below to prove they're better or worse than that. I watch a lot of football. They look like one of the best 15 defenses in the country, and I won't be surprised if at the end of the year they find themselves in the top 15 in a lot of different defensive categories. That they've got a lot of NFL talent. The back end, I still have a few question marks about, although I thought the back end actually played pretty well last week against Florida State for the most part. Third downs has been a problem for Clemson defensively, getting off the field. Like I mentioned, go back to that Duke game as Exhibit A. But look, Clemson's way more talented than Syracuse. Long way to travel. You got to turn around after an emotional loss. We see teams sometimes struggle to do that. I do think this is one of those like classic or prime situations where a team could potentially get upset. Not specifically Clemson at Syracuse, but just this general situation. A team has a huge home game. Let's face it, for Clemson, that was a playoff game. Let's just call it what it is. The Clemson-Florida State game for Clemson was a playoff game. They already had one loss to Duke, and it was a conference loss. Losing to Florida State was not only their second loss of the season, it was their second conference loss, which, like mentioned earlier, knocks them out of anything they hoped to accomplish postseason-wise. It's all gone now. Not only that, they lost in the most brutal way possible. Last play of the game, in overtime, Florida State hits a touchdown pass. I mean, I think actually Clemson, I guess, got the ball last and didn't do squadouche with it. But anyway, you see what I'm saying. An overtime loss at home in what was essentially a playoff game with the season on the line. You're expending a lot of energy and emotion there. You then have to turn around, make one of the longest possible trips you can make within the ACC. Not the longest, but one of the longest. Clemson, South Carolina, all the way up to northern New York, Syracuse, New York, and play a decent Syracuse team. Now, this team's not on the level of a Florida State or even a Duke, and not on the level of a Clemson, I don't think. And, neutral field, these teams play 10 times, Clemson's going to win the majority of them. But I do think that this is a prime spot here where Clemson could potentially lose what would just be a devastating third game of the season in the month of September. I mean, I predicted Clemson to go 9-3. Lose 3 games during the regular season. A lot of people told me I was crazy. I didn't think they'd lose 3 games in the month of September. It's possible. We'll see what happens here. This is an early game, I believe, on Saturday. Noon, I think. Anyway, I went back and forth. I strongly considered taking Syracuse in the 6.5 points. I strongly considered even taking Syracuse on the money line and just predicting an outright upset. I'm going to give Clemson the benefit of the doubt here. Like I said, a lot of what's wrong with Clemson is because of their culture and Dabo's sort of all-in mentality and whatever. But I actually think in this case, that's going to be what keeps their head above water this week on the road at Syracuse. I think Clemson wins this game and finds a way to cover to 6.5. They could win this game by 2 or 3 touchdowns, really, if they don't turn the ball over. That's really what I'm worried about with picking Clemson here, is giving Syracuse extra possessions, particularly at home. Clemson, obviously a massive disappointment this year, and there's nothing Clemson can do from this point forward for the rest of the season to change that. Clemson can finish the season 10-2. That's great. They're still not making the ACC title game, winning the ACC, or making the playoffs. At this point, a New Year's Six game seems like a distant hope even. But I do think they go on the road this week and get a win at Syracuse, and I'll lay the 6.5. Say they win by a couple of touchdowns or so. Man, Taters down bad. Good thing they're getting out of the ACC. Don't forget, Twitter said October 10th, Clemson's leaving the ACC. Have a great day.